Soviet infantrymen pushed through the dense woods in late April 1945. They stumbled upon a high-wire perimeter deliberately hidden among the trees. The soldiers found a sprawling facility the German command never wanted anyone to see. Behind that fence lay one of the most chilling discoveries of the entire war. 6 years earlier, in May 1939, this exact spot was an empty patch of forest, roughly 90 kilometers north of Berlin. Heinrich Himmler personally selected the location for a very specific reason. He wanted a prison close enough for efficient SS management in the capital, yet completely isolated. To build the perimeter, the SS brought in male prisoners from the nearby Sachsenhausen camp. Sachsenhausen sat just a few dozen kilometers away, proving the state was rapidly constructing a tight network of prisons around the city. The male inmates worked through the early months, breathing in the heavy scent of damp spring forest that cloaked the camp from prying eyes. They erected the barracks, raised the stone walls, and finished the administrative buildings. On May 18, 1939, the first transport arrived at the newly built gates. 867 women stepped down into the compound, standing in lines before the freshly constructed wooden structures. The guards immediately began dividing the new arrivals into distinct categories based on their files. They separated the political opponents, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and those deemed social problems, pushing each group toward their assigned blocks. Those 867 women now faced their daily tormentors. Camp directors Max Kogel and Fritz Zuren ran the compound from the top. Kogel held command from 1939 to 1942. Zuren took over next. But these men handed the actual physical violence directly to the newly formed female guard units. The Aufseherinnen walked through the camp mud wearing perfectly neat uniforms. They were ordinary citizens. Germany recruited them from nearby towns with the promise of good civil service salaries. They learned to break prisoners right there on the grounds. Dorothea Bintz joined the ranks in 1939. She was exactly 19 years old. Within months, she established a documented reputation for sadism. The cruelty of the guards scaled up right alongside the expanding war. In the beginning, the camp sat half empty, with a capacity of just 2,000 people. By the early 1940s, that quiet reality was wiped out by a massive surge in population. The daily influx of new prisoners mirrored the exact geography of the German military advance across the continent. Women from Poland, France, the Soviet Union, and Belgium flooded through the gates in continuous transports. They packed into rooms designed for a fraction of their number, breaking the logistical framework of the prison. The barracks simply became unlivable. Those unlivable blocks provided a ready supply of bodies for the next phase. Why did SS doctors start cutting into the legs of healthy women? They needed a cure for a frontline infection. Germany fought a massive war across multiple theaters. Bullets killed thousands of troops, but soil bacteria killed just as effectively. Mud and dirt entered open shrapnel wounds on the Eastern Front. Gas gangrene set in. Soldiers rotted alive in field hospitals. The military high command needed a reliable treatment fast. In the summer of 1942, SS physicians turned the camp into a testing ground. They bypassed animal testing. Karl Gebhardt, Heinrich Himmler's personal physician, led the trials. SS guards dragged healthy young women from the crowded barracks. The doctors strapped them down. Metal surgical tools clinked against steel trays. No anesthesia was given. Gebhardt and his staff made deep, deliberate incisions directly into the prisoners' calves. Women screamed as the blades sliced through healthy tissue. The doctors then rubbed dirt, wood shavings, and live gangrene bacteria straight into the open cuts. They recreated the filthy conditions of a battlefield combat wound inside a clinical facility. Many women died in agony within days as the severe infection spread through their blood. Those who survived the fever faced permanent physical mutilation. The lab-grown gangrene ate away their legs, leaving behind missing chunks of muscle tissue and thick, jagged scars that never fully healed. The SS medical staff simply stood by with clipboards. They documented the exact progress of the rotting wounds. The women who survived the infection trials watched the doctors shift their focus to bone surgery. Some of the new surgical victims were just 16 years old. The doctors viewed the inmates purely as biological spare parts, treating human limbs like materials in a workshop. SS officers told the selected prisoners they were now volunteers, offering a choice between the operating table and immediate execution. Surgeons removed solid sections of shin bones without replacing them, shipping the extracted fragments directly to the SS hospital in Hohenlichen. They operated in conditions where basic antiseptics like iodine were completely absent. The mutilated legs of these young Polish women healed into shortened, twisted shapes. The survivors permanently lost the ability to walk normally. Because their missing bones and extracted muscle tissue forced them to navigate the camp in awkward, hopping jumps, they earned a specific historical nickname. They became known as the Ravensbruck rabbits, or Króliki.
Women stood motionless for hours during the morning roll call. An icy winter wind whipped straight off the nearby lake. While the infirmary surgeons carved into the Króliki, the barracks killed through sheer math. The camp was divided. A smaller men's section opened in 1941. The main women's blocks were originally built for 150 inmates. By 1943 and 1944, guards packed 400 women into those exact same spaces. Bed frames held triple their capacity, forcing inmates to sleep in shifts. The total lack of sanitation triggered automatic outbreaks. Cramped bodies bred lice. Typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis tore through the population. Winter temperatures regularly dropped to -10 degrees Celsius. Exposure finished off the sick. After the guards finally finished counting, the starving survivors marched out to forced labor.
The medical block killed hundreds, while corporate contracts and camp overseers ground down thousands. On April 30th, 1945, soldiers of the Soviet 49th Army pushed through the gates and walked straight into a half-dismantled gas chamber. Pipes lay ripped from the walls. Concrete debris covered the floor. The SS had fled just hours earlier, leaving behind clear signs of their sudden panic. The smell of burnt paper hung heavy in the damp spring air, drifting from metal barrels filled with destroyed camp records. Guards tried to erase the evidence before the front line reached them. Roughly 90 kilometers to the south, Adolf Hitler shot himself in a Berlin bunker on that exact same afternoon. The Soviet troops moved past the wreckage and reached the wooden barracks. The women inside were beyond the point of ordinary starvation. Most could not stand, walk, or speak.
Combat soldiers reacted instinctively and handed out their own military rations to the dying prisoners. The intention was to save them. The physiological reality was fatal. Handing heavy food to severely malnourished bodies triggered refeeding syndrome, causing sudden metabolic shifts and heart failures that killed women right after their rescue. Soviet medical units followed the frontline troops and set up emergency field hospitals, but the clinical needs vastly exceeded their supplies. The initial sweep of the blocks revealed the final math of the abandonment. The number of survivors left behind in the main camp was between 2,000 and 3,000.
Commandant Fritz Suren fled the camp in a car. Beside him sat Odette Sansom, a British intelligence agent. He simply abandoned those 3,000 sick prisoners. Meanwhile, between 20 and 25,000 women walked on foot at gunpoint. That was the math of April 27th and 28th, 1945. Suren used his captive as a human shield to buy time. While he drove west, the main mass of prisoners marched without a clear destination. The noise of thousands of dragging footsteps echoed over the dirt roads of northern Germany. Guards shot anyone who fell behind. Many died from starvation and the freezing cold. Others slipped into the trees during the panic. Suren just wanted to trade lives for a pardon. He failed. A military court tried him, and a firing squad executed him in 1950. But during that last week of the war, He only cared about reaching safety. Surin parked his vehicle and handed the hostages over to American forces.
Commandant Surin tried trading a hostage for his own life at the end of April. He simply copied this survival tactic from Heinrich Himmler, who had started bargaining with human lives weeks earlier. The head of the Swedish Red Cross, Count Folke Bernadotte, sat down for face-to-face negotiations with the SS chief. The Soviet Red Army had liberated Auschwitz in late January 1945. It became obvious that the Nazi regime was collapsing rapidly. Himmler wanted to secure favorable treatment from the Allies, offering to release prisoners in exchange for political points. By late March 1945, the first rescue convoys finally crossed into German territory and reached the camp gates. Heavy buses carried thick layers of fresh white paint. Large red crosses marked their roofs to avoid Allied airstrikes.
The Swedish and Danish Red Cross originally came to evacuate Scandinavian resistance members who had been locked up. But the agreement eventually expanded to include French, Belgian, and Polish women. Between late March and mid-April, the operation pulled approximately 7,500 women out of the overcrowded camp. The convoys transported the evacuated women to Sweden and Denmark.
The Swedish convoys pulled survivors out of a compound that had already been gassing people for months. So how did a labor facility end up with a gas chamber? By late 1944, the Soviet army was pushing west. Evacuation trains from Poland and the Baltic states dumped thousands of women behind the wire. The population exploded to somewhere between 45,000 and 50,000 prisoners. Barracks built for a few hundred now held thousands. The overcrowding created a logistical crisis for the command. They needed a fast way to clear space. The solution was systematic murder. SS doctors set up inspection lines to weed out the weak. Women stripped naked in the freezing cold. Officers walked down the rows, scanning for swollen legs or severe malnutrition. A quick nod meant a guard wrote your name on a transport list. Guards told the selected prisoners they were going to a rest camp called Mittforda, or a nearby youth facility named Uckermark. Mittforda did not exist. Uckermark was just a holding zone for the condemned. By January or February 1945, the execution facility was fully operational. The camp command brought in Zyklon B. Dagish originally patented this hydrogen cyanide formula as a commercial pesticide. Warehouse owners used it to clear grain silos of rats. Now, the SS repurposed those blue pellets to exterminate human beings. Between 5,000 and 6,000 women died in that small concrete room. The suffocating smell of bitter almonds lingered in the confined space long after the fans stopped. The inmates knew what those fake transport lists really meant. Before stepping in front of the doctors, women desperately pinched their cheeks. They wanted to force a little red color into their pale skin. Some rubbed smuggled makeup on their faces to look healthy, but the doctors just kept checking names. They locked doors, released gas.
Gas chambers arrived late in the war. Before that, the main execution method was free 10-hour labor. Officially, Berlin called this place a labor camp. In reality, corporations got a production site right behind barbed wire. Siemens took full advantage. In 1942, the company built a factory next to the fences. A constant hum of heavy machinery bled into the barracks. Siemens signed direct contracts with the SS to solve widespread labor shortages. Women built electrical components for military hardware. They worked 10-hour shifts without pay, surviving on minimal rations. Other prisoners stayed inside the camp workshops to sort the belongings of deported families. Women ripped apart thick seams. They folded heavy winter coats into neat piles. Fingers dug into deep pockets looking for valuables. The site eventually became the main training hub for female SS guards across Europe.
The newly trained guards maintained factory discipline, using frontline penal battalion methods, relying heavily on dogs and floggings. Today, letters about these crimes sit quietly in archives. But in 1944, Polish prisoners hid those exact papers from snapping patrol dogs. Supervisor Dorothea Benz handled the violence with personal enthusiasm, walking the camp to administer beatings herself for any delay. Guards dragged survivors of her anger directly to the punishment bunker, located at the edge of the camp. Inside the solitary confinement cells, women sat for weeks in complete darkness without seeing a single ray of sunlight.
Guards conducted mandatory public floggings just outside the block, delivering the 25 lashes allowed by official SS regulations. Despite the constant threat of execution, a secret organization of Polish inmates systematically recorded these crimes. At night, women folded tiny scraps of paper and hid them inside their clothing to smuggle the evidence outside. While Soviet doctors fought to keep the rescued women alive, the locals of Fürstenberg played dumb. Ash from the crematorium regularly coated the rooftops of their ordinary homes. The town center sat less than 2 kilometers from the main gates. Columns of starved prisoners marched through public streets every morning. A sickly sweet smell of burning bodies drifted across the town. Yet these same citizens claimed they knew nothing after the war. The Soviet command refused to accept this lie. Americans were already doing the same at Dachau and Buchenwald. Soviet soldiers gathered the civilians from their neat streets. They marched them directly toward the barbed wire. The iron gates swung open. Armed guards forced the townspeople to step inside the compound and look at the corpses. Making the local townspeople look at the bodies was merely the first step. Allied investigators quickly locked down the compound to secure the sprawling crime scene. 150,000 women and girls had passed through these gates over 6 years of operation. The new priority was proving exactly what the guards had done to them. The SS command had tried to burn the central archives before fleeing. They ran out of time. Investigators found heavy stacks of documents with charred edges, abandoned on the floors because the rapid Soviet military advance simply outpaced the guards' ability to destroy their own tracks. Soviet forensics teams moved into the site almost immediately. They set up their tripods in the mud and pointed their cameras at the collapsed roof of the gas chamber. Flashbulbs illuminated the dark, narrow concrete walls of the punishment bunkers. Officers photographed the medical blocks and the crematorium ruins before weather could erase the physical traces. Next, they needed the voices of the living. Officers pulled survivors out of the overcrowded barracks for immediate questioning. They recorded direct testimonies from exhausted women who were still too weak to leave the Soviet-controlled zone. They cross-referenced these spoken stories with the surviving transport lists. By the summer of 1945, the Soviet authorities had compiled a massive, formal investigative report. This specific file would remain locked behind Cold War archive restrictions for decades. Meanwhile, British military teams arrived with a very specific target list. They needed to find the missing female agents of the Special Operations Executive. Women like Violette Szabo, Noor Inayat Khan, Lillian Rolfe, and Denise Bloch had all been imprisoned here. The guards executed all of them in the early months of 1945. British officers used these specific murder cases to map out the exact chain of command inside the fences. Their focused interrogations helped piece together the true demographic scope of the site. The camp had processed prisoners from over 30 different countries. The resulting death toll was massive. 90,000 dead. That specific number matched the entire living population of the British city of York at the time. Investigators gathered the charred papers, the bunker photographs, and the survivor statements to build their case. The official post-war documents ultimately recorded the final count of victims at somewhere between 30,000 and 90,000 dead. The 90,000 dead demanded a legal answer that brought British investigators straight to the Hamburg courtrooms. Military tribunals struck hard at first, carrying out 11 death sentences in May 1947. Yet that momentum faded, captured perfectly when Dr. Fritz Fischer
casually walked out of his cell a free man by 1954. His release aligned with West Germany's political course, which used mass amnesties to quietly integrate former functionaries into society. Between December 1946 and July 1948, authorities processed the captured personnel across 4 separate proceedings. The hangings took place on a heavy wooden scaffold constructed specifically inside the walls of Hameln prison. Karl Gebhardt went to those same gallows in June 1948 for directing the medical experiments. But those ropes only caught a fraction of the staff. While prominent doctors stood before the judges, the lower ranks easily slipped away. Justice remained deeply fragmented against the physical scale of the camp. The active investigations ended. Former SS guards changed their names and quietly dissolved into the background of post-war Europe.
While former guards erased their pasts, survivors traded the wooden bunks of Ravensbruck for the waiting rooms of post-war bureaucracies. Returning home brought no automatic recognition. The Cold War split the map of Europe, and it divided the victims' memory. For women of the Polish Home Army, liberation triggered new suspicion. They fought for a Western-backed government in exile, but now found themselves inside a Soviet-aligned state. Post-war Poland often denied them official veteran status. Their stories were quietly suppressed. French women returned to a totally different reality. France needed to rebuild national pride around the resistance. Former inmates arriving in Paris were publicly celebrated as heroes. Survivors quickly formed the Amicale de Ravensbrück organization. They built a network to support their peers and document the crimes. Germaine Tillion took the lead. She was a French anthropologist and a former prisoner. For decades, she gathered physical evidence, her desk filled with meticulously compiled records, handwritten prisoner lists, and cross-referenced transfer dates. She organized the memory of the camp on paper. Tillion turned her survival into foundational historical research. She continued writing until 2008. She was 100. Germaine Tillion fought for history on paper, but for thousands of survivors, the real battle raged inside their own ruined bodies. Women sat in government corridors. They held thin folders. They tried to prove to clerks that their injuries were real. The camp did not end in 1945. It lived on in missing bones and recurring infections. Decades later, a sharp, chronic pain shot through their operated legs with every weather change. They could not outrun it. Their minds carried an even heavier load. Doctors had no vocabulary for what these women experienced. The medical establishment offered no treatment. The term post-traumatic stress disorder did not enter medical manuals until 1980. For 35 years, these survivors carried severe psychological damage in silence. They had no diagnosis. They had no official help. Compensation was another humiliation. Under the 1952 Luxembourg Agreement, West Germany established a reparations program, but the state demanded concrete proof. A survivor filled out forms. She submitted medical certificates detailing her missing leg bones. Across the desk, a clerk searched for official confirmation of her imprisonment. Every document forced them back into the camp. Women from communist countries hit a wall. Cold War borders blocked their access to the funds. The trauma trickled down. A small number of babies survived the camp. Other infants arrived right after liberation. These children grew up in quiet houses. They lived in the shadow of their mother's grief, knowing almost nothing about the past. The survivors simply could not speak. Today, the concrete walls of Ravensbrück stand 90 kilometers north of Berlin. The physical camp remains, pressing its weight into the earth over a sea of forgotten bureaucratic files.